such confusion in one's life that you are unable to find guidance. And generally, of course, when it's true in our lives that there is a dishonesty about ourselves, a dishonesty about our brothers, a dishonesty about our relationship with God, there will always be a confusion. The character will be a confused character, unable to know when to move and how to move, and unable to make decisions, and so forth and so on. That's a sure sign of a basic dishonesty within that person, himself or herself. So here is a characteristic. Character possessing honesty, and out of this comes guidance. Now verse 6. The good man's goodness delivers him. The evil man's treachery is his undoing. By the way, another theme of Proverbs, and this verse kind of hints to it, is that's eventual. God doesn't have payday on Friday. And sometimes we get confused about that because God doesn't immediately move in. But the basic goodness of a man will deliver him. And when you've put your eggs in that basket and you say, I'm going to strike for goodness, regardless of whether it's popular or right in the eyes of man, or it gets me votes or whatever, I'm going to set my course on goodness, eventually that delivers you, see. But the man who's going the opposite direction, doing the seemingly popular thing at a given moment, is going to be a person eventually entrapped in this. It'll be his undoing, is what the verse says. When an evil man dies, his hopes all perish. They are based upon this earthly life. How true it is. There's no hope beyond the grave. God rescues good men from danger, but lets the wicked fall into it. Evil words destroy. Goodly or godly skill rebuilds. One of the focuses of Proverbs, and in just a moment we start skipping around on basic themes, one of the basic messages of Proverbs is about words. And one of the basic messages of the Word of God is about words. And I know many so-called spiritual people who don't understand how to control their tongue. And of course, God says very clearly, if you cannot control your tongue, see, that if that's unbridled, then the rest of your life, regardless of what you say about it, cannot be in order in God's sight. Evil words destroy. Verse 10, the whole city celebrates a good man's success, and also the godless man's death. The good influence of godly citizens causes a city to prosper, but the moral decay of the wicked drives it downhill. It's an important message on citizenship, and the Bible is very emphatic about the believer's involvement with his governmental structure. There's no doubt about that anywhere in the Word of God. When godly citizens back away from involvement, then they reap the result of that kind of thing. That's what verse 11 is saying. To quarrel with a neighbor is foolish. A man with good sense holds his tongue. A gossip goes about spreading rumors, but a trustworthy man tries to quiet them. Now there's another comment talking about speech. There's, in other words, the role of the person to whom something is said. Oh, how important that role is. A goodly man, a trustworthy man, tries to quiet rumors. But a wicked person, a gossip, spreads rumors. Without wise leadership, a nation is in trouble, but with good counselors there is safety. Again, our hearts say amen. Be sure you know a person well before you vouch for his credit. Better refuse than suffer later. This is a theme we got into in the early chapters of the advice of the Father. Honor goes to kind and gracious women, mere money to cruel men. Again, so much emphasis on character in this chapter. Your own soul is nourished when you are kind. It is destroyed when you are cruel. That's a very interesting verse, because here is a concept about, and there are many of these verses, a couple more later on in this very chapter, that have to deal with the fact that what you sow in terms of your own life and what you sow in reference to others is what you reap. Kind of like Charlie Brown's comment, we critical people are always being criticized. And here is kind of the thing. Your soul is nourished when you are kind. And incidentally, that is the one word in the New Testament that is most often used, both in the gifts of the Spirit and in reference to the character of Christ. Gentleness, which is the word kindness, the ability to be kind. And I think that's a most neglected characteristic. Well, this particular verse says, when you are kind, there's a nourishment that occurs in your own soul. It comes back to you. It refreshes you. And you are nourished by this. But when you're cruel, there's a destruction. There is a work done in your own life as a result of cruelness. And oftentimes that's with words, of course, as we know. The evil man gets rich for the moment. The good man's reward lasts forever. The good man finds life. The evil man death. The Lord, now here's again, talking about character. The Lord hates the stubborn, but delights in those who are good. Stubbornness so often becomes a means, it is a means of projecting and continuing our own evil characteristics, whereas God would change us if we'd allow him. Verse 21, you can be sure the evil man will not go unpunished forever. Again, payday is not always on Friday. You can also be sure God will rescue the children of the godly. It's an amazing thing to me, and I think some of us sitting here right tonight are here not because of our goodness, not because of anything we've done, but because of the godliness and the influence and the prayerfulness of parents. And many generations feel the impact of godly parents, and that's a part of what's being suggested here. A beautiful woman lacking discretion and modesty is like a fine gold ring in a pig's snout. It's interesting where the ring is put in that comparison, because of course for a ring to be in the pig's snout means it's going to be 9 times out of 10 in the slop, in the gutter. And beauty and all of the rest without modesty and discretion is like this. The good man can look forward to happiness. The wicked man can expect only wrath. It is possible to give away and become richer. Here's another sub-theme running through these whole Proverbs concerning liberality and giving. We've already touched on it in the exhortations, the admonitional discourses. It is possible to give away and become richer. It is also possible to hold on too tightly and lose everything. Yes, the liberal man shall be rich. By watering others, he waters himself. Reoccurring theme. Bread cast upon the water returns, etc., etc. People curse the man who holds his grain for higher prices. Bless the man who sells it to them in time of need. If you search for good men, you will find God's favor. If you search for evil, you will find his curse. And incidentally, if you search for evil, you'll find them. They are everywhere. You know, when you see a magnet at work, you put a magnet, throw a magnet into, if it's a powerful magnet, and it'll just attract little particles of metal, just run across the floor to that magnet. And that's exactly the way it is. Churches not being exempted from it. Whatever influence, a negative influence, just sucks certain people to it. And a positive influence motivates other people to it. If you're looking for the good men, you find them, and you find blessing from God. If you're looking for the evil, you'll find them too. They're there. And there's always evil around. Trust in money, verse 28, down you go. Trust in God, and you flourish like a tree. The fool who provokes his family to anger and resentment will finally have nothing worthwhile left. He shall be a servant of a wiser man. Goodly men are growing a tree that bears life-giving fruit, and all who win souls are wise. Even the godly shall be rewarded here on earth. How much more the wicked? So the basic theme of chapter 11 is character. Words that reappear through the chapter have to do with honesty, speech, good citizenship, putting affection upon good, seeking out good, being liberal, having a desire to give to others. All of these concepts basically in character. And then chapter 12, again, the theme of chapter 12 is basically hard work. To learn, you must want to be taught. How critically important that is. You must want to be taught to learn. Some people never learn anything new. To refuse reproof is stupid. The Lord blesses good men and condemns wicked. Wickedness never brings success. Only the godly have that. A worthy wife is her husband's joy and crown. The other kind corrodes his strength and tears down everything he does. A good man's mind is filled with honest thoughts. An evil man's mind is crammed with lies. The wicked accuse, the godly defend. The wicked shall perish, the godly will stand. Everyone admires a man with good sense, but a man with a warped mind is despised. It's better to get your hands dirty and eat than to be too proud to work and starve. A good man is concerned for the welfare of his animals, but even the kindness of godless men is cruel. Even the kindness of godless men is cruel. Here again, hard work. Verse 11, hard work means prosperity. Only a fool idles away his time. Crooks are jealous of each other's loot, while good men long to help each other. Lies will get a man into trouble. Honesty is its own defense. Telling the truth gives a man great satisfaction, and hard work returns many blessings to him. 4 times already that phrase has appeared, hard work. A fool thinks he needs no advice. A wise man listens to others. A fool is quick-tempered. A wise man stays cool when he's insulted. A good man is known by his truthfulness. A false man by deceit and lies. Some people like to make cutting remarks, verse 18. But the words of the wise soothe and heal. Here again, words. How important words are. Beside a verse like verse 18 of chapter 12, you need to put, if you're not familiar with it or don't remember the location, write James chapter 3 there. James chapter 3 is so outspoken on this subject, so complete in its words, that the tongue is an unbridled tool set on fire by hell. And in fact, James just reaches the negative conclusion that nobody really controls it. The best we do is do the best we can and let the Spirit control it. It's an important word. But look at that verse 18. Some people like to make cutting remarks. Really enjoy it. Really enjoy it. It's a part of their whole personality. But the words of the wise man soothe and heal. What a difference. Truth stands the test of time. Lies are soon exposed. Deceit fills hearts that are plotting for evil. Deceit fills hearts that are plotting for evil. Joy fills hearts that are planning for good. No real harm befalls the good, but there's constant trouble for the wicked. And I like verse 22. God loves those who keep their promises and hates those who don't. Again, character. Keeping one's word. Being true to one's word. And lying, my friend, is not just what you say. Lying is activity. To say one thing and do another is a lie. And I'm afraid that it's very, very easy sometimes for us to be one thing in one set of circumstances, and then being put under the spot, we change like a chameleon. And I've watched people do this to the degree sometimes that you could lose faith in humanity, period. But here the word is very cleverly and very definitely true that God puts his promise and puts his love and his stamp upon those who keep their word, even when those promises are hard to fulfill, even when you're eating words and you shouldn't have made the promise to begin with or whatever else. But a man who's true to his word, who keeps his promise. Verse 23, a wise man doesn't display his knowledge, but a fool displays his foolishness. Here again, work hard, verse 24. Work hard and become a leader. Be lazy and never succeed. Anxious hearts are very heavy, but a word of encouragement does wonders. God bless those who understand that ministry. God bless those who have that ministry. A word of encouragement. May God give that gift to more people. The good man asks advice from friends. The wicked plunges ahead and falls. A lazy man won't even dress the game he gets while hunting. But the diligent man makes good use of everything he finds. The path of the godly leads to life, so why fear death? All right, now those 3 chapters we've discussed. The first was chapter 10, and then chapter 11 basically on character, and chapter 12 basically on hard work. And now I've asked you to kind of go through and take some kind of pencils or pens and go through the chapters and underline certain verses. Let's take, first of all, the concept of family. Let's flip through the chapters and look at some of the comments that are made about families and members of the family. Let's begin with chapter 13, verse 1. A wise youth accepts his father's rebuke, but a young mocker doesn't. The difference between a wise son and his involvement. Now look at the end of that chapter. Verse 22 has something to say about family. When a good man dies, he leaves an inheritance to his grandchildren, but when a sinner dies, his wealth is stored up for the godly. And verse 24, if you refuse to discipline your son, it proves you don't love him. For if you love him, you will be prompt to punish him. Now this is a very important verse. Many people believe that Paul's discussion, if you believe Paul wrote the book of Hebrews, which I do, in the 12th chapter of Hebrews, has to do with this. In fact, I think it would be good to just flip over there a moment, take this minute. Some of you, of course, who are in our Sunday morning Hebrews class have been studying this with us, verse by verse. But let's just look at this section briefly in Hebrews chapter 12, and we'll begin reading in the 12th chapter of Hebrews with verse, let's begin with verse 6. Verse 5 is perhaps better. Have you forgotten the exhortation which is addressed to you as sons? Now these exhortations that are quoted, Hebrews 5, are from Proverbs. My son, do not regard lightly the discipline of the Lord. Don't faint when you are approved by him. For those whom the Lord loves, he disciplines, and he scourges every son whom he receives. It is for discipline that you endure. God deals with you as with sons. For what son is there whom his father does not discipline? If you are without discipline, of which all have become partakers, then you are illegitimate children and not sons. Furthermore, we had earthly fathers to discipline us when we respected them. Shall we not much more be subject to the Father of spirits and lived? For they disciplined us for a short time as seemed best to them. He disciplines us for our good, that we may share his holiness. Now the key teaching of chapter 12, and something we've been getting into in these morning sessions in Sunday school with the class there, is that this chapter ends by a discussion of bitterness. And it says that the root of bitterness springing up defiles many. Now bitterness in life, and particularly in the church world, bitterness is the source of 9 out of every 10 problems. And what chapter 12 says is that bitterness is the result of not accepting the chastisement of God properly. That when you do not react as a child of God properly, and you rebel against the discipline of God, it becomes the source of bitterness which springs up and defiles you. Now here in Proverbs, the word is over and over again in this particular verse, says to fathers, if you refuse to discipline your son, it proves you don't love him. Again, the same theme. If you're not receiving discipline from God, you're not a son. King James says you're a bastard. You're an illegitimate child. For anyone who is God's son, if God gives this advice to natural fathers, sir, you might very well know that as a heavenly father, how much more this is true. If a man loves his son, he disciplines him. If you don't discipline, it proves that you don't love him. For if you love him, you'll be prompt to punish him. Now, Hebrews 12 is a very critical discussion on this same thing, and I just suggest that you read, incidentally, through that whole passage, because it says, if you take from the grace of God, God will give you grace to endure the chastisement and to grow from it. But when you refuse to take from the grace of God, you become bitter and hard and sarcastic, and all that the church world is filled with. Christians who have refused to move on as God has disciplined them. The good man, by the way, this has nothing to do with family. We're skipping through it, but I want to hit this because I don't think the last verse of chapter 3 of chapter 13, the good man eats to live, the evil man lives to eat. There's an interesting little contrast there. All right, the first verse of 14 is about family life. Only now the emphasis is on the woman. A wise woman builds her house, but a foolish woman tears hers down by her own effort. There are 21 negative comments concerning women in the Proverbs. There are approximately 6 positive comments, and there's a whole chapter filled with positive comments, which would far more than balance the 21. And in most instances, the negative is balanced by the positive in the same verse. Here is a wise woman who does something. A wise woman builds up her house. But a foolish woman, by the very foolishness of her decision, tears down her house. She destroys it. And how many times that is true? Then, if you'll turn to chapter 15, again on the family. 15, verse 5. Only a fool despises his father's advice. A wise son considers each suggestion. By the way, that's a good principle, period. A man's very foolish who is not open to new things, who is reserved upon his own ideas, whatever his own way is. A wise son considers each suggestion, the word says. And then in verse 20 of that same chapter, again, chapter 15, verse 20, a sensible son gladdens his father, but a rebellious son saddens his mother. Now, there's an interesting tie as we go through Proverbs. I've said this before. Even when they use the Hebrew word in Proverbs, the father's teaching is always one of discipline, chastisement. The mother is always, in the Proverbs, is considered as a source of love and acceptance and concern. Though she teaches, her teaching is of a different nature. The father's hand is one of correction and discipline, whereas the mother brings in the balance of love and acceptance. And the tragedy is that when those two are not in balance, the very character of the person is wrong. And so it is with the church. There is to be a balance. The rod and the staff, they comfort me, the psalmist says. And there must be a balance between the ministry of chastisement and the ministry of comfort. And by the way, one of the signs of the last day, of course, will be that men will not endure sound doctrine, but will heap to themselves teachers having itching ears. Now, the phrase in the Greek there says they will not endure that which would contradict their life, you see. And they want only that which will, as we say, tickle the ear, that which will please the ear. Here again, rebellious son saddens the mother. The emotional connection is with the mother. But a wise son fills or gladdens the father's heart. Now in verse 15, verse 27, or chapter 15, verse 27, again back on the family. Dishonest money brings grief to all the family, but hating bribes brings happiness. Bribery is such a subtle thing. My friend, don't you think for one moment that all bribery has to do with people walking up and saying, I'm going to give you $1,000 if you'll vote this way on such and such an issue. Bribery is a very subtle thing. Oftentimes when people want to build their little course, their little dissentious groups, and they reach out, and their tentacles will be involved in making you feel obliged to them. Bribery is an awful, awesome, terrible thing. And the man of God will always acknowledge and steer away from it. Here again, of course, the phrase is the family. If you get dishonest money, the family's going to feel the grief of that dishonest money. But again, hating bribes will bring happiness. Now, a couple other more on the family before we move on. Let's go now to chapter 17, and verse 6 is about the family. An old man's grandchildren are his crowning glory. Now, I want you to notice the next one. A child's glory is his father. Again, Proverbs puts such emphasis on the role of the father, the discipline of the father, the necessity of the father instructing. And here is the point. Many fathers fear doing that because if they do, they'll feel like they'll lose the child's sympathy or the child's love. Far be that from being true. For the word is true when it says a child's glory will be his father, when his father is that kind of father that this book is speaking about. Verse 16 also. Here's good advice for you parents about to send your kids to school. It's senseless to pay tuition to educate a rebel who has no heart for truth. It's senseless to pay the tuition. to educate a rebel who has no desire for truth. That's a good point to mention, incidentally, and that is, I think that we have a very foolish concept about everyone going to college or university. I think that's a very stupid, foolish thing. And it's kind of a status thing, kind of a thing that has somehow happened in the last few years of American life. And these words are pretty plain. Verse 21, by the way, of that same chapter says this: it's no fun to be a rebel's father. No fun to be a rebel's father. And a rebellious son, verse 25, a rebellious son is a grief to his father and a bitter blow to his mother. And then chapter 18, again on the family, verse 22, the man who finds a wife finds a good thing. She is a blessing to him from the Lord. Now there's, again, the contrast throughout this whole book between the difference, the high esteem that God puts on a woman of character, and what a goodly thing it is when a man finds that kind of a woman, and what kind of blessing she brings both to him and to the family that shall come to be. Now look at chapter 19. Several very important verses on the family from chapter 19, verse 13 and 14. A rebellious son is a calamity to his father, and a nagging wife a noise like a constant dripping. How many of you have ever had the experience of laying in bed when the shower was dripping? You know, just constantly. It's amazing to me how a small dripping can just absolutely drive you up the wall. And, verse 14, a father can give his sons homes and riches, but only the Lord can give them understanding wives. Notice those two verses together again. A nagging wife is like a constant dripping, but the next verse turns around and says, a father can give his sons homes and riches, but only the Lord can give them what kind of wives? You're not afraid to say it, are you, wives? Understanding wives. Understanding wives. Verse 18, discipline your son in his early years while there is hope. If you don't, you will ruin his life. My friend, it's just this simple and this true. A child's will must be broken. Not his spirit, but his will. And if it doesn't occur within those first critical years, then you will regret the rest of your life the child that has gone undisciplined in your home. And it's just that simple. I believe, incidentally, that's one reason, and I've spoken again on this subject in the class several times, I believe this is one reason that the father should always use some other implement than his hand. Or if necessary, when the mother is chastising, the same being true. There ought to be a definite correction and a definite separation between the person and the means being chastisement, but the person whose concern and love is, whose concern is love. Whether it's a belt, I remember I in my family was a razor strap, and of course some of you don't even know what a razor strap is. Some of you terribly young ones don't even remember that experience. And by the way, incidentally, my dad had already gone to using, by the time I was around, he had given up the shaving cup and the shaving cream and the shaving brush, and he had gone to using aerosol cans and two-edged razors, Gillette razors by that time, but there was still a razor strap. And I came to understand that it had nothing to do with shaving at all, but that it had been maintained for other reasons. And I think it's very important. Disciplining your son in his early years, or your daughter, either one, of course, but certainly with a son, because the male tends to be more hard-headed, more, even as a child. There's always more of a rule to be broken in most instances, although there are exceptions to every rule, of course. Praise. Here again, the word is very clear, and a lot of us say, I don't mistreat my father and mother, but you don't write to them, you don't telephone them, you're not really concerned, or maybe once or twice a year you take a concern. I believe that that's wrong. And incidentally, I'm going to say this too, because I believe it with all my heart. I believe we pay in our American culture for the lack of involvement we have with our elderly family members. I believe we have received in our families the results of not having the balance that comes from the elderly members of the family being closely connected with the family. And I happen to believe, that the most missing love in America today is grandfather and grandmother love. And I think it's the most strategic thing that has just vanished from the American culture. Part of the reason it's vanished is nobody wants to be grandfathers and grandmothers anymore. All the grandmothers are trying to look like spring chickens, and all the grandfathers are having operations to tighten their skin so they'll have the complexion of a 30-year-old. And nobody wants to acknowledge or desires to acknowledge this role. But I am absolutely convinced that there is something a grandmother and grandfather contribute to a child that can never be contributed directly by the parents. And that there's a balance here. And in God's sight, the family is supposed to be continuing to live together. God never planned for there to be convalescent homes and all of the rest. And in every culture, the cultures that have really succeeded in the past family-wise have been cultures that treated their aged not only with respect, but with reverence, and who gained from that experience. So, all right, disgracing father and mother, it's a public disgrace. And I think that disgracing can be a lot more than just publicly disgracing. I think it can have to do with just disservice and lack of interest and lack of concern. All right, still in the family, chapter 20, verse 7. Listen to these words. It is a wonderful heritage to have an honest father. It is a wonderful heritage. My dad has never been a great success as men measure success. I'm beginning to see more and more, however, how successful he was and how successful he is. He never pastored a large church, and my dad never even had an office in the church. He never knew a lot of the kinds of fame that come to some of the rest. But the interesting thing, although he's been out of the ministry for many years now in an active sense, pastoring, he pastored for 25 years in one town, as I've told you before, in Sharon, Pennsylvania. But it's amazing to me when I went home this last time for just a few weeks, and Dad was in the hospital. When I go into service stations, people would recognize the car and such concern, and they would all stop, not just to say, how's your dad doing, but then they would start to tell me what his life meant to them and how important he was to them. What a goodly heritage it is to have an honest father. That's a good heritage. Wonderful heritage. Verse 11, the character of even a child can be known by the way he acts, whether what he does is pure and right. I think that's a very good verse. The character of a child is even known by the way he acts. And then verse 20, God puts out the light of the man who curses his father and mother. God snuffs out the light of the man who curses his father and mother. And then verse 21, same subject, family. It is better to live in the corner of an attic than with a crabby woman in a lovely home. Verse 9, chapter 21. Better to live in the corner of an attic than to live with a crabby woman in a lovely home. 19, verse 19, chapter 21. It is better to live in the desert than with a quarrelsome, complaining woman. Now, I didn't put those two together. They're just the only two that speak right there about family in that chapter. Chapter 22, verse 6. Still in the family. Teach a child to choose the right path, and when he's older, he'll remain upon it. Verse 15. A youngster's heart is filled with rebellion, but punishment will drive it out of him. Now look at that verse. A youngster's heart is filled with rebellion. You don't have to teach a child to be rebellious. Boy, they start it from the earliest, when they're crying and wanting their way about whatever the circumstances are. And unless, as this passage says, with loving correction and with loving concern that's driven out, then that'll be the very thing that child will live with, and you'll pay for not having taken the time. Verse 13 and 14 of chapter 23. Don't fail to correct your children. Discipline won't hurt them. They won't die if you use the stick on them. Punishment will keep them out of hell. Let's read it again. Don't fail to correct your children. Discipline won't hurt them. They won't die if you use a stick on them. The neighbors may think they're dying. They won't die if you use a stick on them. Punishment will keep them out of hell. Well, there are a few others. Look at verse 24 of chapter 25. Chapter 25, verse 24, it's better to live in the corner of an attic than in a beautiful home with a cranky, quarrelsome woman. It's repeated twice, just a few words added. Verse 15 and 16 of chapter 27. A constant dripping on a rainy day and a cranky woman are much alike. You can no more stop her complaints than you can stop the wind or hold on to anything with oil-slick hands. In other words, forget it. If you've gotten one of those kind, learn to live with her because you're not going to change her. All right, I think that's enough on the family. That takes us through those sections. Now let's go back again to chapter 13. And let's start with another area. Let's start with the area of speech. Let's notice some verses on the subject of speech. Chapter 13, verse 2. The good man wins his case by careful argument. The evil-minded only wants to fight. And verse 3, self-control means controlling your tongue. A quick retort can ruin everything. How many times does that happen, huh? Verse 5, a good man hates lies. Wicked men lie constantly and come to shame. It's a frequent theme of Proverbs. Verse 10, pride leads to arguments. Be humble, take advice, and become wise. Verse 14, the advice of a wise man refreshes like water from a mountain spring. Those accepting it become aware of the pitfalls ahead. Oh, how true that is. That's the whole message of Proverbs. If you let God teach you, even though you're inexperienced, he'll teach you about all the pitfalls though you've never been over the road before. He'll teach you about them. A wise man's advice refreshes like water. Verse 17, how true this one is. An unreliable messenger can cause a lot of trouble. Reliable communication permits progress. Just look at that verse a moment. Unreliable messengers cause a lot of trouble. You can assassinate character that quickly by a tongue. And it's just the same as murder in the sight of God. When God names 7 things he hates, 3 of the 7 have to do with speech. False witness, deceiving speech, telling lies. But here's the other thing. If you have reliable communication, then progress can be permitted. There is never progress long where there is lying or there is lack of love in communication. Chapter 14, verse 3. A rebel's foolish talk ought to prick his own pride, but the wise man's speech is respected. Verse 5. A truthful witness never lies. A false witness always lies. What a difference that is. And then chapter 14, verse 29. A wise man controls his temper. He knows that anger causes mistakes. Brother, that's a true message, if ever there was one written. People who are controlled by anger are constantly involved in mistakes. Now, chapter 15, verse 4. Gentle words, look at this. Gentle words cause life and health. Griping brings discouragement. There's no fountain of discouragement that is greater than a critical, griping spirit. It's a fountain that produces discouragement. It produces discouragement in others, and it produces eventually discouragement in that person. You cannot fill your mouth with that kind of talk without it affecting you. Verse 7, only the good can give good advice. Rebels can't. So forget about advice from rebels. Rebels don't give good advice. Ever. Verse 23, everyone enjoys giving good advice, and how wonderful it is to be able to say the right thing at the right time. How true that is. Some of us ought to just keep quiet because it's very hard for us to say the right thing at the right time, I'm afraid. It's better be silent. Verse 23 and 24 of chapter 16. From a wise man comes careful and persuasive speech. Kind words are like honey, enjoyable and healthful. Chapter 16, verse 28. An evil man sows strife, and gossip separates the best of friends. Aren't these practical, down-to-earth? Verse 17, verse 14, it's hard to stop a quarrel once it starts, so don't let it begin. There are people in churches that pride themselves in the fact they haven't spoken to other people for so many years or so many months. It's hard to stop a quarrel once it's begun. A lot of churches are like the McCoys and the Hatfields. You know, you get there and you sense it. I was in a church once in the valley here in California, and I absolutely knew within the first 2 services of preaching that something was wrong. And so I just sat and observed very carefully how people came in the church and sat, where they sat, and the people they're associated with when they left. And after about 3 days of meetings, I went to the pastor and I just read him the sociogram, as they say in sociology. I read him the sociogram of his church. He was amazed. He didn't realize it was so obvious, but it is obvious. Old quarrels that just perpetuate themselves. And a church being a close institution is a good place for that to happen. All right, verses 27, 28. This is chapter 17 again. The man of few words and a settled mind is wise. Therefore, even a fool is thought to be wise when he's silent. It pays him to keep his mouth shut. You know, it's amazing if you just sit there and nod your head, people really think you're intelligent. But most of us, when we open our mouth, we prove that we aren't. So the moral of the story is, if you want to be thought to be intelligent, just be quiet most of the time. Because most of the time when we speak, we prove to the world that we're not so intelligent after all. Chapter 18, verse 2, a rebel doesn't care about facts. All he wants to do is yell. See, don't confuse me with the facts. I've already made up my mind. I've already got my opinion. It's amazing to me. In fact, generally, the people who yell loudest are the people who have the fewest facts. You know, the more loud people yell, generally, they are people who know very little about what they're talking about. Verse 4 of chapter 18, a wise man's words express deep streams of thought. And oh, how wonderful it is when you find a person like that to explore those streams. I have a friend whom I treasure so very, very much. And when I have an opportunity to be in this person's presence, that's all I want to do. I don't want to watch television or do something else, but just to listen, because there's such a fundamental stream of thoughts, and they bring them out of a deep life. You can't, my friend, you can't express deep wisdom and deep thoughts if you're a shallow person. There's a stream that is your life. And only when that stream is deep and true and sincere can there be thoughts that will be the same. Verse 6 and 7, a fool constantly gets into fights. His mouth is his undoing, and his words endanger him. And then look at verse 8. What dainty morsels rumors are. They are eaten with great relish. What a tragic truth that is. Verse 17, any story sounds true until someone tells you the other side and sets the record straight. Any story sounds true. Verse 21, those who love to talk will suffer the consequences. Men have died for saying the wrong thing. All right. Verse 9 of chapter 19. A false witness shall be punished, and a liar shall be caught. That always will be true. The more words, they just become like nets wrapped around your legs. Verses 27, 28. Stop listening to teaching that contradicts what you know is right. A worthless witness cares nothing for truth. He enjoys his sinning too much. That verse 27 is particularly important because I am constantly finding Christians who say, oh, I listen to so-and-so on the radio. And I know not everything he teaches is right, but he says some good things now and then. See? Well, I don't find too many people that dig through garbage cans to get their dinners for the evening. I'm sure you could do it. I'm sure you could do it. You could make a dinner out of digging through garbage cans. But I don't know many of you want to do that. Stop listening to teaching that contradicts what you know is right. And I tell you, we are in a day, again, and we've been here in the charismatic movement before, we are in a day of running around, heaping to ourselves teachers. You know, my problem, and I think the problem most people I know, isn't getting more teaching. It's practicing the teaching I already know is right. It's putting into practice what I know to do. But I don't know. There's something, I guess there's something marvelous about a new thing, supposedly new thing. All right, chapter 20, verse 19. Don't tell your secrets to a gossip unless you want them to broadcast it to the world. Verse 23 of chapter 21. Keep your mouth closed and you'll stay out of trouble. Good advice. All right, I think that's about all we'll handle on that area of speech, but there's a lot of others I have underlined. One of the primary emphases of the book of Proverbs is on the area of speech. Now, the third area I want to cover tonight is the area of spiritual advice, and this will be the last area we'll cover for this evening. Going back to chapter 13 again, beginning with verse 9. The good man's life is full of light, but the sinner's road is dark and gloomy. Verse 13, same chapter. Despise God's word and find yourself in trouble. Obey it and you will succeed. That's a direct corollary. It's all through the word of God. The love for and acceptance of the teachings of the word of God are the things that put a man in good standing with God and with his fellow man. All right, chapter 13, verse 21. Curses chase sinners. Blessings chase the righteous. And verse 2 of chapter 14. To do right honors God. To sin is to despise him. To do right honors God. Verse 11, the work of the wicked perishes, the work of the godly will flourish. Verse 12, before every man there lies a wide and pleasant road that seems right, but it ends in death. 14, the backslider gets bored with himself. The godly man's life is exciting. Oh, I hope your life is exciting. Verse 19, evil men shall bow before the godly. Verse 21, to despise the poor is to sin. Blessed are they who pity them. Verse 26 and 27, reverence for God gives a man deep strength. His children have a place of refuge and security. Verse 27, reverence for the Lord is a fountain of life. Its waters keep a man from death. Verse 31, anyone who oppresses the poor is insulting God who made them. To help the poor is to honor God. The godly have a refuge when they die. The wicked are crushed by their sins. In verse 34, godliness exalts a nation, but sin is a reproach to any people. Chapter 15, verse 3, the Lord is watching everywhere, and he keeps his eye on both the evil and the good. Verse 8, the Lord hates the gifts of the wicked, but delights in the prayers of his people. 9 and 10, the Lord despises the deeds of the wicked, but loves those who try to be good. If they stop trying, the Lord will punish them. If they rebel against that punishment, they will die. The depths of hell are open to God's knowledge. How much more the hearts of all mankind. Verse 16, better a little reverence for God than great treasure and trouble with it. And then chapter 15, verse 24, the road of the godly leads upward, leaving hell behind it. The Lord destroys the possessions of the proud, but cares for widows. Verse 26, the Lord hates the thoughts of the wicked, but delights in kind words. Verse 29, the Lord is far from the wicked, but he hears the prayers of the righteous. In verse 33, humility and reverence for the Lord will make you both wise and honored. Humility and reverence for the Lord. Chapter 16, the first 7 verses are all in the subject of spiritual advice. We can make our plans, but the final outcome is in God's hand. We can always prove that we are right, but is the Lord convinced? Commit your works to the Lord, then it will succeed. The Lord has made everything for his own purposes, even the wicked for punishment. Pride disgusts the Lord. Take my word for it. Proud men shall be punished. Iniquity is atoned for by mercy and truth. Being good comes from a reverence for God. And when a man is trying to please God, he makes even his worst enemies to be at peace with him. Do you hear that? Verse 9 and 10, we should make plans, counting on God to direct us. Verse 10, God will help the king to judge the people fairly. There need be no mistakes. Verse 11, the Lord demands fairness in every business deal. Established this principle. He established this principle. Verse 17, the path of the godly leads away from evil. He who follows the path is safe. Pride goes before destruction, haughtiness before a fall. Verse 20, God blesses those who obey him. Happy is the man who trusts in the Lord. Verses 32 and 33, it's better to be slow-tempered than famous. It is better to have self-control than to control an army. And I love verse 33. It's one of my very favorite verses. We toss the coin, but it is the Lord who controls the decision. Then in the next chapter, chapter 17, silver and gold are purified by fire, but God purifies hearts. That's verse 3. Verse 5, mocking the poor is mocking the God who made them. He will punish those who rejoice at others' misfortunes. Verse 15, the Lord despises those who say that bad is good and that good is bad. The Lord despises them. Verse 20, an evil man is suspicious of everyone, and he tumbles into constant trouble. Chapter 18, verse 3, sin brings disgrace. Verse 10, the Lord is a strong fortress, and the godly run to him and are safe. Verse 11, the rich man thinks of wealth as an impregnable defense, a high wall of safety. What a dreamer he is. Had an interesting experience on that subject this week at Rotary. One of the men that was introducing the speaker was talking about what a sad affair in the news. We always have a news report. The editor of the Tribune is in the club, and he always gives a news report. And you know what the news has been like recently. So this guy was up introducing the speaker, and he made some comments about the state of the world. And he said, of course, Howard here, he already knows what it's going to be like because he's reading the book that tells the end. And he interjected that just in the middle of saying everything else, and I was so stunned, and I think everybody in the room was just stunned by the whole word that was being said. And this passage here, which says the rich man is thinking of his wealth as being impregnable, he's a dreamer. And I find more and more people everywhere I go that are knowledgeable of the fact that their answers aren't answers at all. Well, what a day this is to witness for Jesus Christ. What a tremendous day. I have not yet been in the last 3 months, I have not been yet to a Rotary meeting in which they didn't discuss something, at the table in which I was sitting, that we didn't discuss something about the second coming of Christ. The other day one of the men got started on talking about the temple, whether or not the temple is going to be built in Jerusalem, and men that you think have no knowledge at all of spiritual things, but boy, it's there. The world's beginning to realize that its fortresses are crumbling all around it. And as far as money is concerned, friend, if you think it's an impregnable fortress, forget it. You're a dreamer. Chapter 19, verse 3, a man may ruin his chances by his own foolishness and then blame it on the Lord. How often that's true. Same chapter 19, verse 17, when you help the poor, you're lending to the Lord. And he pays wonderful interest on your loan. I wish we all would learn that. Verse 21, man proposes, but God disposes. Verse 23, reverence for God gives life, happiness, and protection from harm. In verse 29, mockers and rebels shall be severely punished. Now we're going through these on spiritual concepts now. Let's look at chapter 20. Verse 9, who can ever say, I've cleansed my heart, I'm sinless? The Lord despises every kind of cheating. Verse 12, if you have good eyesight and good hearing, thank God who gave them to you. Amen to that. Verse 22, don't repay evil for evil. Wait for the Lord to handle the matter. Very critical point. 23, the Lord loathes cheating and dishonesty. Verse 24, since the Lord's directing our steps, why try to understand everything that happens along the way? Now, that's a good verse. Since the Lord's directing our steps, why try to understand everything that's happening along the way? It's foolish and rash to make a promise to the Lord before counting the cost. Verse 25. Verse 27, a man's conscience is the Lord's searchlight exposing his hidden motives. A man's conscience. Chapter 21, verse 8, a man is known by his actions. An evil man lives an evil life. A good man lives a godly life. Verse 12, the godly learn by watching ruin overtake the wicked. Verse 18, the wicked will finally lose. The righteous will finally win. Verse 30 of chapter 21, no one, regardless of how shrewd or well-advised he is, can stand against the Lord. Chapter 22, verse 5, the rebel walks a thorny, treacherous path. The man who values his soul will stay away. I think that's enough of those, maybe one or two more. Let's take in chapter 25, verse 28. A man without self-control is as defenseless as a city with broken down walls. Chapter 27, verse 1, don't brag about your plans for tomorrow. Wait and see what happens. All of these and many, many more in this area that deal with spiritual lives and our spiritual lives. Again, about character, about listening to God, about following after His Word, and so forth. Now, next week, I'd like to take with you just one or two more runs through these passages, and then I want to concentrate on the last three chapters, and we'll be finished. Next week, I'd like to talk about friendship. This book is filled with some important insights into friendship. I actually know people, and I know Christians, who do not have a friend. Oh, acquaintances, yes, but a friend. And I would say that, in my experience, there are very few people who know how to cultivate friendship. Very few. Psychologists say that no man has more than 6 friends in a lifetime. And, of course, they're speaking about involved and deep relationships. But there are some who have none. And I think that's a very tragic thing. And the book of Proverbs has a lot to say about being a friend. Do you know, I've discovered something in my own life, that when your emphasis is on being a friend, then having friends becomes kind of the flow back of that whole experience, without any sense of working at it or striving at it, because you've made an investment. That investment begins to pay off. It's kind of interesting having Gordon McAllister around on staff. I was just thinking about it the other day. That's something that I'm sure neither of us ever anticipated or dreamed would come true. But my first relationship with Gordon was when he was a boy of about 13. A very troubled young man in many, many aspects. Very brilliant mentally and troubled in many areas. And I made a real investment of my life in him during those years. For 2 years, of course, I was his youth pastor in the North Hollywood Church. And then subsequently, following that in friendship. And I think it was about